ever get that feeling? Like you're staring down a mountain of information, like for an exam or trying to learn some new topic, and you just feel like your brain is about to overload.
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there. Definitely not alone in that feeling.
And that is exactly what we are diving into today. You guys shared some really interesting stuff about learning more effectively, without that feeling of being totally overwhelmed.
Right. Like how to actually grab hold of knowledge, make sure you really learn it quickly and thoroughly without that kind of drowning in data sensation.
Exactly.
And so the mission in this deep dive is really to extract those key strategies, those actionable things you can actually do from a really fascinating source.
Okay, lay it on us.
Dominic O'Brien's How to Pass Exams.
Ah, okay. Dominic O'Brien. Now, for anyone who might not be familiar, Dominic O'Brien, a really, really fascinating character. In school, he wasn't exactly seen as like a star student,
Right.
more interested in music in his own imagination than the standard curriculum.
Yeah.
But he took that kind of imagination energy and focused it on studying memory.
Wow.
And incredibly, in just 5 years, he became the first ever world memory champion.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
We're talking someone who could go up against people who had memorized tens of thousands of digits of pi and just, outperform them.
Wow.
The mental athletics world recognized his talent in a big way. Grandmaster Raymond Keane called his brilliance, quote unquote, dominantly brilliant. So high praise.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting about O'Brien's story is that his journey really started with a moment of astonishment, actually. He witnessed someone memorize a deck of cards in under 3 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. And that really kind of shifted his whole understanding of what the human mind could do.
Right. Like blew open the possibilities?
Exactly. And it sparks, years of really dedicated study. And his book really hinges on this central idea.
Okay.
That your ability to learn, this isn't just some fixed trait that you're born with.
Yeah.
You can significantly improve how your brain learns and remembers through the right techniques.
Yeah.
So the book kind of makes this case, right, that a lot of our brain's potential is just sitting there, kind of unused, as O'Brien puts it. And the real key to unlocking that potential, especially when it comes to memory and learning faster, is our imagination.
It's so true. And it's kind of sad that so many people think that you're either, born smart or not, that you're just naturally bright or dim.
Yeah.
And that's a really limiting belief. And I think that's something that O'Brien experienced personally at school.
Yeah. He says that had a real impact on his, self-confidence. He even remembers this teacher's, frustrated questions, saying, can't you remember anything? Is nothing absorbed in that head of yours?
Yeah, which is really interesting because it kind of betrays a lack of understanding of how we actually take in information, how that absorption process actually happens.
It's almost like, you get this really sophisticated piece of equipment, but you don't get the instructions.
Exactly.
You can't expect to, really use it to its full potential if you don't even know how it works in the first place.
Right. And that's exactly what O'Brien argues. He says, even before you get into tackling, any specific subject, what every student needs is like a user's guide to the brain.
Yeah.
They need to grasp how to learn, how to learn.
Okay.
And that's the real aim of this book.
Okay, fascinating. So one of the first things that he really kind of dives into is speed reading. It almost sounds too good to be true, this possibility of dramatically increasing how fast we can read.
Yeah, it's ambitious. But his argument starts with the capabilities of the human eye. So he points out that our eyes can refocus incredibly fast. And at typical reading distance, we can take in about 3 words in one glance. And so theoretically, that means you could read at speeds of around 1,500 words per second, which is just mind-blowing. It would be like 90,000 words per minute.
Okay, so what is the bottleneck? What is preventing us from reaching those speeds?
He gives a few different reasons. One is that he thinks we're taught to read aloud when we're kids. And that kind of gets us using our vocal cords more than our eyes and our brains. And he also says, we get into this habit of saying each word as we read it silently. So subvocalization.
Ah, yes. That little voice in your head.
Exactly. It's like having an internal narrator that's just slowing you down the whole time.
Right. So is the key then breaking that habit?
That's a big part of it. But just to give you a sense of, what's possible, he mentions this amazing example. Eugenia Alexienko, she was reportedly able to read at 416,250 words per minute.
Wow.
So we're not just talking skimming. A senior researcher at the Moscow Academy of Science actually suggested that she was taking in the sense of the pages as they were being flipped.
That's That's beyond comprehension, I think, for most of us. That's faster than flipping through a video.
It's really exceptional.
Yeah.
And so then O'Brien talks about more sort of common reading habits that kind of hold us back. He mentions how we're often discouraged from using our fingers to track lines as we read, even though for many people that feels like a more natural way to guide their eyes.
Right.
He explains that our eye movement during reading isn't actually smooth and continuous. It's actually quite jerky.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so your brain is taking in the information during these brief pauses, little stops. They're called fixations.
Oh, I see. So it's not about like seeing every single word clearly, but more where your eye is actually stopping.
Exactly. It's all about the fixations.
Okay.
And this is what leads to this technique he recommends, which is using your finger as a pacer. So the idea is to train your eyes to move more smoothly and quickly across the page, so minimizing those kind of jerky movements, reducing the time you spend on each fixation. So he suggests that you gradually increase your speed. And he also makes the interesting point that words actually only become indistinguishable at speeds way over 1,000 words per minute. So it's really not our physical limitations that are holding us back as much as, breaking those ingrained habits and getting our brain to, process the information more efficiently.
Okay, so we can potentially read faster. But how do we make sure we actually remember what we've read or heard? Which kind of naturally leads to note-taking.
Yeah.
The effective note-taking.
Absolutely. So effective note-taking, this is the cornerstone of learning, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's during lectures, revision sessions, or even preparing presentations. And O'Brien actually talks about some common but actually ineffective styles of note-taking that we all probably fall into at some point.
Okay.
So he talks about the great scoop, where the aim is to write down every single word, which, as we all know, ends up as this cluttered, overwhelming mess. And then there's danger, faulty signaling.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
Which is those notes that are just like this chaotic web of arrows and boxes.
I think we've all produced at least one set of those in our academic careers. Mine sometimes look like wiring diagrams gone wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Where actually the organization or the attempt at organization actually obscures the main point rather than clarifies it. And then there's precision engineering. So those beautiful, perfect notes, perfectly structured, perfectly formatted, but actually so much focus on the form that you might be sacrificing actual useful information.
Interesting. Yeah, style over substance.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are the people who take hardly any notes at all, relying solely on their short-term memory, which we all know.
Which is not the best strategy.
Not the best strategy long-term.
Yeah.
The problem with all of these styles is that they can lead to, information overload, disorganization, and really a focus on the actual mechanics of writing rather than understanding and remembering what you're trying to learn.
Okay, so what's a more effective approach then? Because he advocates for mind maps, which are a much more visual way of structuring information.
He does. He introduces mind maps as this more efficient, more visual, ultimately more brain-friendly way to take notes. And he touches on Roger Sperry's Nobel Prize-winning research that actually highlighted the specialized functions of the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
Oh, interesting.
So the left tends to deal with, the analytical, the logical, the sequential, the linear, the speech, whereas the right is more involved in the visual, the imaginative, the spatial, perceptive, the rhythmic. But the key insight here is that mind maps are designed to engage both sides of your brain.
Okay, so getting those two, the logical and the creative, to work together. And I know he uses the example of understanding sarcasm.
Yes, exactly. So if you were only using the left side of your brain, the logical side, you might take sarcastic words completely literally.
Right.
But it's the right brain's ability to understand the context, the tone of voice, the nonverbal cues that allows you to pick up on that implied meaning.
Right. Okay, so how does a mind map actually differ kind of fundamentally from those traditional linear notes? Like, what are the defining characteristics?
So O'Brien outlines 5 key characteristics. First, you start with a central image, a compelling image that represents the subject you're trying to, grapple with. And then the main themes radiate outwards from that image as branches.
Okay.
And each main branch should have its own shape and a clearly printed label, ideally just a single keyword. And then those main branches then sprout further sub-branches. And really importantly, all of these branches are interconnected to visually demonstrate the relationship between the different ideas.
Okay, so you're not just getting like lines and lines of text, but you can see how things are connected visually, so it's much more immediate. It's almost like seeing a whole landscape, the landscape of the topic all at once.
Exactly. And he even includes an example of Angelica Kauffman's life represented as this doodle-like mind map, which is really cool.
Oh, interesting.
To give you a visual idea of how this actually looks.
Yeah, I guess it would be really hard to describe with words how these mind maps work. You really need to kind of see it to get it right.
Exactly. And he compares linear notes like taking a railway journey. You're following a single track and you might miss that broader context.
Yeah, you're just looking out the window at what's immediately beside the tracks.
Right, whereas mind maps offer this kind of helicopter view where you can see that whole layout and then you can zoom in on specific details that you need. So he gives several benefits, that they provide this kind of gist, this overall sense of a topic very quickly. They highlight keywords and their associations, and they give you that crucial overview right away.
So this sounds so much more engaging than just filling pages with lines of text.
Totally.
Are there specific guidelines for creating effective mind maps?
Yes, he gives several really important guidelines. Start with that central image, make it colorful, make it engaging, use single keywords on your branches. Print them clearly and concisely, make the branches flow organically from the central image. And use different colors to kind of differentiate themes and also to aid in memory recall. And crucially, engage your creative imagination and make associations freely. So brainstorm without censoring your initial thoughts.
Okay, so it's about tapping into your brain's natural tendency to think visually and make connections. It's not just useful for revision, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
He mentions other applications as well.
Absolutely. Mind maps are incredibly versatile. He suggests using them to capture information during, lectures or discussions because it forces you to distill it down to its most salient points. And you're visually representing the relationships between them. He even sort of playfully suggests that they might reveal when a speaker goes off on a tangent, which I thought was kind of funny.
Interesting.
But they're also fantastic for processing written material. So textbooks, novels, because you don't have that dynamic presentation aspect, your imagination really kicks in to create those connections and emphasize those key points as you're building the mind map with the keywords and ideas from the text.
Yep.
But he also makes this point that, your initial understanding of kind of the central theme of the text might evolve as you read further.
Right.
And you shouldn't hesitate to, actually redraw your mind map to reflect that deeper understanding. It's a dynamic process.
Okay, very cool. So that sounds like a really powerful tool, both for taking information in and then processing it in a way that actually sticks.
Yep.
Let's kind of shift gears a little bit now and talk about memory itself, the core of this book, because he talks about these incredible feats of memory, things that seem almost beyond human capability.
Yeah.
I mean, he gives these examples of people who could recite, 16,000 pages of Buddhist texts
Wow.
or memorizing 15,000 phone numbers.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And he emphasizes that with very rare exceptions, like people who have true photographic memory, these extraordinary abilities aren't due to some kind of inherent difference in their brain physiology.
Right.
Instead, he kind of distills it down to two key ingredients:
Okay, what are those?
desire and technique.
Desire and technique. Interesting. So
Yeah.
it's not some kind of gift, it's something that's cultivated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So exceptional memory is not like, something you're just born with. It's something you can learn.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like any skill, right? You need the motivation, you need the desire to put in the work.
Right. Exactly. And he makes this really useful analogy to sports.
Okay.
So that burning desire to succeed, that fuels the hard work and the dedication that it takes to, really learn and consistently apply the necessary techniques.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So he even suggests that even with subjects that you might not initially be passionate about, actively seeking out those aspects that do interest you, you can make the whole learning process much more enjoyable
Oh, yeah, for sure.
and therefore more effective.
Yeah.
He also kind of talks about, mental exercise. The value of that, engaging your brain. Things like chess, bridge, Scrabble, which, these are fantastic for sharpening your logic, sequencing skills, memory, spatial reasoning. He even talks about mentathletes
Oh, wow.
and memory competitions.
Really?
Yeah, like the World Memory Championships or the Mind Sports Olympiad.
That's a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
So framing memory almost like an art form, sport.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And really, a fundamental tool for learning how to learn.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the kind of crucial role of imagination and association,
Mm.
which I think is something that he identifies as really the key to unlocking your memory potential.
Yeah, because he explains that trying to memorize random lists of unrelated items is difficult because there's no natural connection there.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's precisely where the power of imagination and association comes in. So he references Aristotle, this really, I think, profound idea that the human soul thinks through mental pictures.
Mm.
And imagination is kind of like the translator.
Okay.
It converts, sensory information into those images that our intellect can actually process.
Right.
So our brains are just inherently better at remembering visual information.
I think that's definitely true.
Right.
Yeah.
And he uses this really vivid example, our dreams,
Okay.
as kind of a readily available demonstration of that innate imaginative capacity that we all have,
Yeah.
that directly counters that common excuse, oh, well, I'm not imaginative enough.
Right, yeah.
He even shares his own experience. So his kind of pivotal experience of memorizing a deck of cards. And he did it in a mere 38 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. And he emphasizes that the core of the skill was about, quote unquote, just clicking what you see in your mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that the vast majority, like 95% of memory training, is focused on developing your visualization abilities.
Really? So it's less about like rote learning and more about this visualization.
Yeah. Clicking what you see.
Mm-hmm.
It almost sounds kind of effortless, but I mean, that must require a huge amount of mental effort.
Totally. And then he defines association as that process of understanding objects or concepts by what we connect them with.
Okay.
So he gives examples like, a pipe makes you think of Sherlock Holmes,
Yeah.
or Wellington boots make you think about muddy paths.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he says that these associations actually create this kind of aura around objects. So they give them character and trigger emotions, and that makes them significantly more memorable.
Okay. So it's all about building those mental bridges,
Right, yeah.
between the new and the familiar
Exactly.
to really help cement that new information.
Yeah, and that leads to the link method for memorizing lists of items. So this involves creating artificial, often quite bizarre or humorous connections between each item on the list using your imagination. He says it's useful in subjects like history because you can remember those chronological sequences of events, and it's also a really good general mental exercise just to boost your kind of creative association skills.
Okay, so you're essentially creating this like mental narrative,
Yeah,
however outlandish, that ties each item to the next in order.
exactly. You got it.
Okay, but what about abstract words or concepts that are harder to visualize directly?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So he suggests using inventive substitution. So for instance, if you're trying to remember the word faint, which is kind of hard to picture directly, you might visualize painting a giant letter F.
Oh, okay, using the sound.
Exactly, yeah. And he emphasizes that it's that act of making that association, however creative you have to be, that's what strengthens the memory. He also points out that the basic link system can sometimes lack a kind of specific backdrop. So your
Yeah.
linked images, they might just end up floating in this kind of like white, misty haze, almost like, cartoon drawings in a vacuum.
Okay, yeah, they're not grounded
Right.
in any way.
And that can actually make them less vivid and therefore less memorable.
So just creating the chain of images isn't always enough. We need to ground them somewhere
Precisely.
in our mind to make them real.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
He actually stresses the importance of providing a familiar mental background or setting to make the images feel more realistic
Okay.
and consequently more memorable. So a really nice example he gives is trying to memorize, say, the royal houses of Great Britain.
Okay.
So instead of just linking Norman to Plantagenet, to Lancaster in this abstract way, you create an actual imaginative story. And it unfolds in a very specific, familiar location, like Buckingham Palace and Trafalgar Square.
Oh, okay, interesting. So you're turning potentially this dry list into this bizarre and engaging story, but in a location that you know.
Exactly. And this leads to lateral imaging. So he uses this remarkable personal experience. He memorized 54 packs of playing cards,
Wow.
which is a total of 2,808 individual cards, as just a prime example of the power of using your imagination in those familiar mental locations. So what he did was he'd prepared 54 distinct mental routes through places he knew well, with 52 predetermined stops or locations along each route.
Okay.
So every single playing card was assigned a person to represent it. And to memorize the order of these shuffled decks, he imagined meeting those card people at each designated stop along those journeys. And the journeys themselves, the sequence of the journeys, preserved the order of the decks.
Okay, so he was essentially creating this vivid mental history. Like he wasn't just memorizing the sequence of cards, he was memorizing the sequence of encounters.
Exactly. And he says it tricked his memory into almost believing it had actually witnessed those experiences. And he also introduces this thing called the Brad Pitt factor. So this is the idea that you don't necessarily need like perfectly clear photographic mental images for something to be memorable.
Okay.
Sometimes a strong overall impression built from a combination of senses and a powerful emotional reaction
Right.
can actually be even more impactful on memory. And that's why he chose to represent those cards as people.
Okay, yeah.
Because, people are just inherently more memorable. They evoke that wider range of associations and emotions than just, say, abstract shapes or numbers.
Right.
So that emotional connection really matters.
Absolutely.
And then, building on this idea of using familiar locations, which seems to be really crucial, he talks about the journey method and the ancient concept of loci.
Okay.
So he describes this as kind of taking the scenic route to a perfect memory. So strategically using landscapes, locations to kind of fix or place items and, importantly, their order in your mind.
Okay.
And he emphasizes that you can potentially store thousands of bits of information using this method. And it's not like a new invention.
Right.
This is something that the ancient Greeks actually discovered and refined over 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
In an era, before widespread literacy where books weren't readily available, having a strong memory was absolutely vital. So the art of memory was known as mnemotechnics.
Okay.
And he references this ancient text called Ad Herenium, which actually gives really detailed instructions on the journey method. And it talks about using loci, which are places that are really easy to visualize and remember, like
Right.
rooms in a house, corners of a building, even statues in a public area.
Right.
So those ancient orators who would deliver these, really long speeches with no notes,
Right.
they weren't just naturally gifted. They were employing these pretty sophisticated memory techniques. Exactly. And O'Brien, he actually shares a fascinating modern adaptation.
Okay.
So he uses the geography of virtual worlds from computer games as effective mental journeys, and he finds them surprisingly conducive to storing and retrieving information.
So from ancient Greek philosophers to, modern gamers, that core principle endures.
Yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Now, for information that's not naturally spatial, like numbers, he introduces his own system called Dominic,
Yeah, Dominic.
which has a rather enthusiastic full name.
It does, doesn't it? The deciphering of mnemonically interpreted numbers into characters, or, alternatively, the decoding of mundane, incoherent numbers into clarity.
Wow, very descriptive. So he kind of likens learning this Dominic system to learning a new language, but one with a relatively small vocabulary of just 100 words, or person-action combinations in this case.
Okay.
So before he really gets into the Dominic system itself, he just mentions a couple of other basic number-to-image systems that people can use.
Yeah.
So things like the number rhyme method, where you kind of associate like rhyming words with numbers to create those memorable key images. And then there's the number shape method, where you visualize numbers as objects that resemble their form. And he emphasizes that the associations that you create yourself are always the most effective.
Of course. Because they have more meaning to you, personally.
Right.
Okay. So if one rhymes with bun, you associate the first thing I need to remember with an image of a bun.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So then what is the core of the Dominic system?
So it involves converting each digit from 0 to 9 into a corresponding letter. So 1 equals A, 2 equals B, and so on.
Okay.
With a few mnemonic exceptions, so like 6 equals S for 6.
Right.
And 0 equals O because of its shape. And you take those letter codes, you pair them up to form the initials of a familiar person, real or fictional, and you associate each of those people with a unique and memorable prop or action. So for any 2-digit number, you imagine that person performing their action. For 4-digit numbers, you can create a sequence of 2 separate person-action pairs, or even a single person-action interaction where the roles can be reversed depending on the context. So some of the examples he gives, and these are great, are things like the number 1846 becomes Adolf Hitler, AH, baking the cake, FC,
Okay.
or 4618 is Delia Smith, DS, goose stepping.
Okay,
Yeah.
those are certainly images that are going to stick in your mind.
Exactly. The more unusual, the better.
So for longer sequences then, do you just keep stringing these person-action hooks together to create a chain?
That's exactly what you do. So he gives this great example of like a longer number. 35774 could become Clint Eastwood's CE burning a bra on a sailboat.
Oh, oh.
Or, a 6-digit number, you might imagine a person performing an action on or with another person.
Okay.
So things like George Bush, GB, putting makeup, SA for slap-on Saddam Hussein, SH, or Albert Einstein, AE, having a shower, GS, getting soaked with the Spice Girls, SG.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, this is taking mental imagery to a whole new level of creativity.
You've got to go there. It really works.
So he summarizes basically the key to remembering numbers as giving them artificial meaning, personality, and characteristic actions. So this Dominic system is essentially like a personalized dictionary for translating digits into those memorable mental images.
Exactly. And he really encourages people to create their own, cast of characters. And he talks about how actually it's relatively easy and even fun to learn
Okay.
and to practice. And it transforms your perception of data from something to be avoided into something you can actually engage with and master on a daily basis.
Okay. So we've kind of gone through effective systems for remembering lists and sequences, locations, even these complex numerical data.
Right.
But what about tackling kind of more complex learning material like literature?
Okay. Yeah.
Because closed book exams in that area can be really daunting, right?
They can. Yeah.
Where you have to recall specific quotes. You have
Yeah.
to demonstrate, in-depth understanding.
Yeah.
So how do you even approach that?
So he emphasizes the value of having those key lines. Whether it's poetry or prose or dramatic speeches, readily available in your memory.
Right.
And his primary piece of advice is to actively translate those quotations into direct, powerful symbolic imagery. Engage as many of your senses as possible. Think about motion, emotion, color, and make strong personal associations. Don't be afraid of exaggeration or humor,
Okay.
and really tap into symbolism and your imagination. And just like with other information, providing that familiar backdrop
Okay.
is really crucial. So he suggests mentally housing quotes from different authors or different works
Mm-hmm.
in specific locations, like maybe in a mental library organized by author or genre.
Okay, so you're not just trying to remember the words themselves. You're building this kind of multi-sensory experience around them.
Yeah.
In a specific space.
Exactly. And for longer passages, like a long speech, he suggests embarking on a mental journey with specific stages along the way
Okay.
that correspond to the sequence of lines. So you take that first keyword from each line, convert it into a vivid image, and place it at that stage of your journey. And because a single line can contain several important words or concepts, he recommends using more open, spacious locations in your journey
Right.
to allow enough room for several images, essentially. And he walks through the first few lines of Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy
Oh, right. Yeah.
as a practical example. And the imagery he suggests is really striking. Rings of fire and melting flesh, Thor encountering a dewdrop on his nose, and ore being fixed by Eve.
Okay, that's going to be memorable.
Yeah, definitely memorable. And he says that this leads to faster learning because you're not just rereading.
Right.
And the retention tends to be much longer because you've got these really strong visual and spatial anchors. And the journey itself acts as a kind of track
Okay.
in your mind, preventing you from skipping lines. And he even quotes Cicero, who described mnemonic symbols as three-dimensional idiot boards, effectively protecting against mental blocks during recall. And once you're really familiar with that journey, you can easily recall specific lines just by navigating to their location.
So if I need to remember the third line, I just mentally walk to the third stop on my imaginary route?
Precisely. And he talks about the potential challenge of understanding Shakespeare's language, because obviously some meanings have evolved over time.
Yeah.
So he suggests adding new elements to your mental images to represent your understanding.
Okay. Expert speaker.